following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is Not Therapy. I'm Liana, and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health, using my top 10 sayings for going good crazy. This week, we're going to talk about the difference between boundaries, values, needs, and manipulations. These four things are frequently talked about in a mental health context, but just last week, I had a client say, I keep hearing about core values and how important they are, but what are they? Core values are the things you believe are most essential for living a happy, ethical life. You'll hear a lot of self-help experts drone on about finding happiness through duty, but happiness is more about living our values and surrounding ourselves with people who share and honor them. It's not enough to just talk about values. In order to truly feel fulfilled in life, we have to live in accordance with our values. For instance, if creativity is a core value for you, then trying to live a life based on a 9-to-5 job where you stare at spreadsheets all day, that's not going to make you happy. There needs to be a part in your life where you're making things and expressing or listening to challenging ideas. When people talk about feeling useless, it's usually a good sign they're not living in accordance with their values. Most people contribute a lot to the world. They just don't see how much they contribute because their efforts aren't going towards things they value. For me, compassion is a huge core value. As a leader, sometimes, a lot of the time, we have to make decisions that are going to make people unhappy. And these people tend to lash out and say a bunch of horrid things. And with the modern internet, it's extremely easy to damage someone's reputation without even having to reveal your identity. And it's essential for sleeping at night that people like me know all the horrible accusations about my intents just aren't true. Compassion prevents you from saying deliberately hurtful things when you're angry. It reminds you that people have the right to be angry at you too. And it maintains connection with the fact that terrible people are still people. And it's important to have compassion with yourself. Top 10 phrase, self-esteem cannot exist without self-compassion. Now, effective advocacy and activism, those are also rooted in compassion. Emphasis on effective. The progressive left is in tatters right now because it lost sight of that fact. Calling people horrible names like genocidal monster, baby murderer, that's not an effective protest or negotiating tactic because the public is going to expect some slavering, cartoonish villain when you lob that stuff at them. And the minute your opponent seems remotely civilized, you've lost the persuasion war. You need to focus on the behaviors, not the person. But listen, you don't have to agree with me regarding this emphasis on compassion as a value. You may think that, for instance, ambition and win-at-all-cost risk-taking are more important. And, this will probably take you far regarding personal financial wealth. But we're likely not going to get along too well because I have never been able to get my head around screwing over other people for money. That doesn't make ambitious people bad people. It just means that I'd struggle to be friends, like actual friends, with someone focused on this kind of ambition. Similarly, lying really bothers me. In order for me to trust someone, they have to be willing to have the tough conversations early instead of only saying what they really think after it's far too late to do anything about it. And I know this belief isn't universal. Far from it. A lot of people think that dishonesty in the interests of keeping the peace or not rocking the boat is being nice. And what I do is a word that begins with B and rhymes with itchy. But due to the realities of having CPTSD, I need to absolutely believe that the people around me are telling me the truth and that they're not hiding anything major from me. Because to me, there's nothing worse than someone holding on to resentments regarding things that were solvable if they'd said something at the time. And blowing up at me with a laundry list of complaints and grievances and criticisms of my character that are exactly the opposite of things they said about me just a month ago, that doesn't tend to fly with me because my immediate thought is, were they lying about their opinion of me then? Or are they lying about their opinion of me now? And often these people exist that neither. They're not lying now. They're not lying then. It's just, but okay. How is it that I was kind and thoughtful last week, but I'm selfish and cruel this week? Radically shifting opinions like that are learned manipulations, wherein someone savagely criticizes your core character to try to shut you up or get you to comply with something that they think you wouldn't do if they just asked. It can also be a sign of splitting or all or nothing thinking, which is a cognitive distortion that can be a sign of serious mental health conditions. Not necessarily, but possibly. Usually, though, there's nothing, personality disorder going on. It's just a manipulation. And they're very normalized in our society. And I got her quicker than I thought, so I think it's a good time to take a break. We did values, so I want to give you a chance to consider your core values. Now, if you get stuck, there are lists online that can help you pick some really good core values. You want to narrow it down to 2 or 3 like I did, like creativity, compassion, honesty, right? The narrowing it down is the tough part, but it's the part that will give you more certainty and peace that you're making the right decision and you're on the right track. So usually when you do this core values exercise, you get starting with 10 to 15, and then you look for basic patterns in them and can, everything here be encompassed by one single core value, and you winnow that down. That's how it works. So we're going to take a break and give you a chance to ponder that a little bit, or just go to the bathroom or get a snack. All good, no matter what. Do you have a story you think would be good for the show? Are you interested in sponsoring the show? Liana at nottherapyshow.com is my direct email. Nottherapyshow.com is our website. At nottherapyshow is our social media where you get Monday mantras and Wednesday wisdom every week. We'll be back. Building blocks of mental health. This week on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We are back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking about the building blocks of understanding mental health. Boundaries, values, needs, and manipulations. It may seem strange that manipulations are on a list of building blocks of mental health, but it's important to understand what manipulations are so you can spot them in others and avoid them in yourself. Persuading someone isn't the same as manipulating someone. Persuasion is about convincing people to change their mind. Manipulation is about power and control. And okay, I know some of you are rolling your eyes at the phrase power and control because you've been hit over the head with the Duluth model one too many times. What's the Duluth model? If you don't know about it, don't worry about it now. Just those of you who do, it's okay. Breathe through it. We're going to do this. It is true that the bulk of abuse in relationships, including in friendships, is of the nonviolent variety. Right? The emotional abuse, the psychological abuse tends to start long before people start throwing things or hitting you. And if you learn to spot the manipulations and coercive behaviors when they're psychological, you can avoid, the physical abuse and even the financial abuse that gets, it's been sensationalized in the media to the point that I no longer think it's helpful. First of all, get the idea out of your head that only bad people abuse. This isn't a mwahaha villain of the week. Even the most well-meaning person is capable of this stuff sometimes. Telling yourself that you mean well so you couldn't possibly have hurt and abused someone, they're just overreacting, is falling into the pit of the first type of manipulation that I want to discuss. minimizing, denying, and blaming. Deny is the D in DARVO, which stands for deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. This is a model that, experts say is the way people avoid taking responsibility for wrongdoing. Making light of someone's concerns, dismissing them, mocking them as overreacting. These are manipulation tactics so common that a lot of people don't see them as manipulation. It's telling someone it's no big deal. Don't worry, it's no big deal, right? It's reassuring. No big deal. It's not a big deal. That is not reassuring. What that's really communicating is, I don't care about your problem. You're my problem. Shut up. We've got pretty good at recognizing that isolation and intimidation are forms of manipulative abuse, but minimization and putting people down have been normalized to the point that they're sometimes even depicted as being romantic. This drives me crazy. I know I'm kind of old, like I'm in my 40s, but I want to yell at the screen when I see the romantic paradigm around two young people is that they're totally into each other, but they're not admitting they're into each other. And they say things like, it's nothing, I'm fine, we're cool, which is denial and minimizing of themselves. And the guy usually insists the girl is annoying, and the girl tends to think the guy is a loser or something. And people, younger people, older people listening now, putting each other down isn't cute. It's not romantic. Those patterns continue in the relationship because these people can't be honest with themselves since they're completely out of touch with their own feelings. It's really, really difficult to understand that these things are not good for relationships when they're made to seem adorkable or romantic instead of mistakes that the characters have to overcome. I'd be fine if I thought media was depicting these sorts of dishonest exchanges as what they are, kind of toxic, really insecure. But it's generally left to the audience to parse that the guy called the girl annoying because he likes her and therefore feels powerless. And that sounds like a recipe for abuse because it is. When feeling drawn to other people makes you feel threatened, that's a sign you need to work on yourself, that you may not be ready for the vulnerability that comes in relationships. And that's okay. No one is required to be in a relationship, romantic or otherwise. There are other not so little manipulations that have also become normalized. I have anxiety, for one. It's getting to the point when someone says, my anxiety, okay, I'm going to start listening carefully here because this isn't necessarily a red flag, but it's a yellow flag when people talk about their anxiety condition like it's a pet. When the hell did this become normal? And when can it stop? Thanks. I get anxiety every time I do one of these shows, right? I'm an introvert. This is like, what? The awareness that people are listening? God, right? But anxiety conditions are real and serious. But if anxiety is stopping you from enjoying life, the solution is not to say, my anxiety, and expect everything to stop. It's time, if you're there, to get real and serious help. And this is one of these things. I see this everywhere. Like I said, this is normalized. If you feel called out here, don't feel bad. Because this starts in families, okay? I see too many family cycles of parents are really busy, kids either are actively ignored or they try to shield their parents from their own struggles because their parents are so stressed, right? And then this neglected person only gets attention when they melt down. And if this happens often enough, the neglected person perceives that the only way they can get attention is through a series of crises. And the already exhausted, stressed out parents who are taking on too much for themselves, they get exhausted. And so the people around the very anxious person pull away. So the anxiety gets worse and worse because the anxious person doesn't understand what's happening. They just know people don't want to be around them. This situation, which is really common, isn't helping anyone. If you have a family member with an anxiety condition, it's not enough to ship them off to therapy every so often. You have to talk to them and make changes in their life so that the anxiety isn't ruling it. You know, a similar manipulation that people don't see as a manipulation, but it makes things worse instead of better, is this habit people have of saying, I feel, when what they really mean is I think. And I know I've talked about this before, but this is a shining example of a manipulation that people don't realize is a manipulation because it's so damn common now. Because you learned somewhere along the line with therapy that didn't do a lot of good, but taught you how to make everything stop around you, right? You learned that feelings are always valid. People aren't supposed to argue with your feelings. And so a conversation goes something like this. I feel that you are wrong. Well, I don't agree. I checked my data 3 times. Well, I'm just telling you how I feel. No, you're not telling someone how you feel. You're offering a critical opinion and you won't own it. Who cares if you feel like someone's wrong if you're not willing to have a conversation to test that hypothesis? And people are like, well, that's harsh. This is about manipulations you don't realize are manipulations. Follow along, please. Here's another example. I feel like you're all against me. The response is, well, we're not. We just don't know how to help you. Well, I feel like you are. That's another accusation posed as a feeling so the original speaker can avoid challenging their own negative assumptions. And I hear people say, but this is actually how I feel. No, it's not. It's not. You are stating an opinion, which is a story you've told yourself to explain a feeling, to explain why you're feeling fearful or why you're feeling uncomfortable. You know, they looked at me funny. They must be against me, or everyone always turns against me. When they do things like this, they're all against me. That is not a feeling. Is that a character in Inside Out? No, that's dialogue from Inside Out. That's how you know it's not a feeling. Here's another one. Okay. Well, I didn't tell you because I was afraid you'd get mad at me. That's a common one, right? That doesn't excuse not telling them if it was something a reasonable person would get angry at. Remember I said off the top, people are allowed to be angry at you sometimes? When you're like, I didn't tell you because I was afraid you'd get mad. That's telling the other person that it's their fault that you withheld information from them because of what they might kind of sort of would do. Because, well, they're just so mean, right? I ask you, would you like to be on the receiving end of these sorts of I did nothing wrong, the problem is you statements? Probably not. And that's why you don't do it to other people. When I didn't tell you because I was afraid you'd get mad, you're telling people you're not allowed to get mad at me. And that's going to get in the way of your relationships because in any close relationship, people get mad at each other sometimes. Isn't right, isn't wrong, it is just so. Hopefully by this point you can see how all of this relates to the other pillars, needs and values, right? Needs aren't being met. Person doesn't understand how to meet needs. Person instinctively manipulates, acts in a way that's counter to their values. Anxiety increases. Unmet needs and manipulation get worse. Now, we'll talk about needs after the break, but I want to stay on manipulation just for a little longer because, again, there are certain manipulations that are so widespread that they're seen as normal, but normal isn't healthy. I work with a lot of people who are unable to trust others because they are terrified of being manipulated, coerced, and trapped. I work with people who are afraid to take even a small step because they're afraid they'll wind up being expected to do a lot more than they agreed to. And I've had this happen to me myself a lot. I know this is a reasonable fear. Many of us come from families where manipulations were the norm. So we don't see when we do them ourselves, but we're always constantly on alert for them in other people. And the way out of this fear is to drop your own manipulation, to stop waiting for everyone else to go first to make you feel completely safe. Because that's not fair. You need to take little calculated risks of this is how far I'm willing to go, and only this far, and see which people respect that boundary, and which people push further. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The biggest wake-up call for me, one of them, but this was a pretty big one, of how much manipulation is baked into our culture is when I got married decades ago. Almost all of the advice I got from older women before I got married was some sort of manipulation. Hide money so he doesn't get to tell you how to spend it. Tell him he's like his abusive grandfather because it'll shut him up. That'll show him. Never barbecue because it's the only kind of cooking men will do. All of these are manipulations, and I happen to like grilling. Thanks very much. What the hell? Every single one of these pieces of advice amounted to manipulate him so he'll control and abuse you less. I even had a psychologist tell me once to play my cards closer to the vest. Don't tell my husband everything I was feeling because, it's overwhelming. One, the guy just assumed I announce every feeling that comes into my head when my problem is actually the opposite instinct. And two, this was a male psychologist suggesting that men are less emotionally capable than women. And I might have lost you a while back because you might be thinking, well, it's true that barbecuing is the only kind of cooking men will do. If that's true, why are most of the top chefs men? The normalization of manipulations means we live in a world where women are treated like overgrown children at work and men are treated like overgrown children at home. And it sometimes gets so bad that people are punished for behaving like actual adults and, trying to solve a conflict directly instead of by playing games. A lot of our assumptions about the world, hear the air quotes, the world, are based in the games we ourselves play. One I've been hearing a lot lately is the world prefers women and hates men. And this is often said by men who have never learned to meet their own emotional needs. You may have heard, if you're of an older cohort like me, all men are potential rapists. And this is, said by a lot of women who learned to control those around them by saying they were scared until that fear turned into a prison of their own making. Then there are the people that spend hours fighting with people online. Then they complain that this group hates them and that group hates them. The whole they hate me thing is usually a crock. Okay, real talk. That acquaintance you're convincing yourself hates you likely doesn't think that much about you at all. Maybe the problem is really that you can't admit that you don't like them. And if you suddenly start suggesting that somebody who was your friend, maybe not a close friend, but a friend 5 minutes ago suddenly hates you because of a political discussion, maybe that's some internalized self-hatred coming out. Just maybe. Either way, it doesn't really make any sense that a person who was your friend 5 minutes ago hates you now because of a divergent political opinion. And this is we're so far gone with this stuff that the richest white men in the world, they're the ones seemingly terrified of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. I mean, okay, fair. A lot of DEI programs are underfunded jokes and not very funny ones. But still, the fact that these super rich white guys can't handle Diversity programs? Imposter syndrome much? Persuasion is about making others aware of their options and steering them towards the best one. Manipulation is the act of cutting other people off from potential alternatives through denial of information, mockery, belittling, blame. Pick your tactic. The whole point is you're cutting people off from choices. Avoiding manipulation gets easier when you learn what your own needs are and start figuring out how to get them. Because when you identify and respect your own needs, you naturally get better at respecting the needs of others. This is true with a lot of mental health stuff. You practice the external to get better at the internal. So showing compassion for others helps you be compassionate with yourself because you start talking to yourself like you're a friend instead of the screaming inside your own brain, right? And learning to meet our own needs and respecting our own stuff means it's easier to respect that in other people, even when we may not understand them. So I'm going to take a break and come back with that. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. At nottherapyshow on social media. That was a long one, but I think manipulation is the big challenge of our age. We'll talk more about needs. What are those when we come back on It's Not Therapy? The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking about the basic building blocks of solid mental health. Boundaries, values, needs, and avoiding manipulations. We've dealt with values and manipulations and the avoidance of manipulations. Now I want to talk about needs, because our relationship to our needs is totally screwed up. Now, first of all, people tend to confuse needs and wants. Secondly, people miss that in order to have a happy life, we need to get some of the things in people we want sometimes, and we need to feel like people want us around, at least sometimes, right? People turn wants into needs. I need it when it's just you want it. This is pretty regular because they think that if it's just a want, then it's just selfish and no one has to pay attention. Childhood neglect messes us up in a lot of awesome ways. It starts with, not making the child feel valid, and so they go to therapy and learn I feel when they actually think, and then they get to manipulate their parents, and the green grass grew all around we go. There we go. Okay. What we want, real talk, is a big part of who we are. It's what psychologists call subjectivity. And subjectivity means our unique perspective and beliefs. And subjectivity is very important to us as people. It's actually something that psychologically separates people from objects. You understand that other people have their own framing. I hope. Because that's what stops us from using people like tools for our own gratification. Supportive, loving relationships, friends, romantic, any kind, family. Supportive, loving relationships acknowledge that people getting what they want sometimes is important. Just sometimes that thing they want can't be provided right now. It's those moments when you can't get what you want right away, when the delayed gratification needs to happen, that knowing how to meet your own emotional needs becomes essential. How to meet your needs when you can't get what you want. The tricky part is that these needs change throughout our lives. And the best known model for needs, Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, well, that might lead people astray. Now, The hierarchy of needs is, as the name suggests, a hierarchical model with physiological needs like food, water, air, protection from the elements, and sleep on the bottom. And then it rises up through safety and security needs like healthcare and employment. Then we hit love and belonging. Then above that on the pyramid is self-esteem and individuality. And then at the very top, self-actualization, creativity, purpose, meaning, all that good stuff. The problem with a hierarchical concept of needs is this stuff's not so simple. Humans are social creatures. We get our physiological needs met through cooperation, right? And then it was just weird things like Maslow putting sex on the bottom physiological needs category, which completely separates the physical act of sex from the emotional component. And this was done because reproduction is essential to the continuation of the human race en masse, right? But you don't self-actualize a group of people. That's the self, not the collective. It starts to get very, very, very mushy, right? Sex is not strictly a need on an individual level. Similarly, the idea that love and belonging is supposed to occur before self-esteem, at least for me, that was absolutely not true. Okay, if you don't like yourself, you're never going to feel liked by other people for very long. When I was younger, I was stuck desperately trying to get acceptance from other people until I faced my fear from childhood that I actually was completely unlovable, right? That the people that said that were right. I was just defective. And it was only when I went, well, maybe they're right? But I realized, I actually do like myself. And that seeking approval from all these other people who controlled me with criticism was separating me from the fact that I actually think I'm a decent person. I mean, I'm far from perfect, but I don't deliberately hurt people, and I try to leave the world a better place than I found it. I try to own my mistakes, right? And so I had to self-actualize before I developed self-esteem. And until I developed self-esteem, I couldn't set boundaries, and therefore I didn't feel safe. The Maslow's pyramid was totally upside down for me, especially because I was starving myself to be some ideal of attractive to men that was never, ever, ever going to be enough. There will always be someone out there who will fling around the fat and ugly insult, and they're usually other women, okay? Because these other women know just how much thinness and traditional beauty is tied to social status in women. And yeah, some men do it too. And they're jerks. I've just found that it's far more common. These people who sit on their couches and cut up actresses on social media. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this to each other? Let's stop. Now, here's the reason we might be doing to each other, right? In an ideal world, a child grows up in a safe, loving home where all their psychological and emotional needs are met. So that child develops self-esteem in their teens and they self-actualize by sometime around 30. Now, how many of us live in that ideal world? I sure don't. Needs come from a clear understanding of who you are as an individual. So they're as unique as every person. And your parents are not mind readers. I don't know where we came up with this idea. The best example a parent can set is admitting they made a mistake and making it right. One of the things I realized about myself is that desperate need to be liked. I was trying to be normal. I absolutely do not need to be liked. It's nice to be liked, but the need to be liked, I actually find that concept, needing to be liked, repellent and terrifying. Now, what I do need is to be respected. And that's because I'm aware that, like I said, when you need to be liked, people use that to control you. Respect is what's there when you don't like someone personally, but you recognize that they have something valued to offer, something valuable to offer. I mean, the Super Bowl halftime show, Kendrick, man, he has no respect for Drake. That took him to the top. Sign of the times, right? Now, for me, there are many people I respect greatly for their talents and skills and their insights, even if I don't get along with them personally. I have to take them in measured doses, but they're great at what they do. But when I have to let the fact that I like someone, or when I have let the fact that I like someone override the fact that there were a lot of things about them that I don't respect, that person that I liked but not respected, those people tend to turn on me at great personal cost. The same way Drake used people to get cred from certain American rap scenes and then lost their numbers when he thought they didn't need them anymore, right? What I realized about myself, and, this is no criticism of anybody who is the opposite of what I described. I'm not someone who can manage to have that stoner burnout friend, who you've known for decades, who's constantly causing trouble for the friend group. And ironically, part of that comes down to the fact that drug abusers are really good at manipulating the people around them. Addicts and recovering addicts are great examples of just how complex needs and perceived needs are, right? When you're physically addicted to a drug, your body needs that drug to not feel sick, to be functional, right? You don't need that drug to stay alive. In fact, drugs are bad, okay? They're killing you. But you do need that drug to be functional. And, well, being functional is required to things like earn money and pay the bills. So people choose to wreck their health with a drug so they don't lose their job and become homeless. Obviously, a truly compassionate society wouldn't force someone to make a choice between paying rent and getting clean. But again, we don't live in that society right now. These are why needs are so complicated. There's a lot of competing factors. Another thing I decided about myself is I talked about creativity off the top. I need some sort of creative outlet to be happy. But I also need to connect with facts and science. I need both because I like the spiritual stuff. I like the creative stuff, but I don't want to fall into the woo-woo stuff. Right? Now, this makes time management an ongoing challenge because I have a lot of varied interest. And I know that if I'm not careful, is what ends up being sacrificed is human contact. Now, I've found a balance through work. I work with a lot of artists. I interview researchers. So I have to engage with people, but I get to engage with them with stuff that I find very interesting. But more recently, I've had to make a correction because I was not taking the introvert alone time I need to stay balanced. I very much like people, right? It's not about not liking people. It's just if I overcommit myself socially, I start feeling really overwhelmed, emotionally overloaded, sometimes physically sick. And it's no one's responsibility but my own to know when to step back and recharge, because I'm the only one who can tell for sure that I feel that way. That right there is the essence of what it means to know and meet your own emotional needs. It is my responsibility to stay engaged with the things that make me fulfilled. I can't give that power to another person. It is my responsibility to pull back and let people know when it's too much. I don't rely on other people to tell me I've had enough. I appreciate when people are helpful. I appreciate when people are sensitive and understanding. I appreciate that a lot. But no one is responsible for my needs but me. And it only took a raging case of CPTSD and a butt ton of therapy for me to get there. Better late than never, right? Part of my hope with this show, with the whole it's not therapy concept, is that I can help people avoid the worst parts of my journey and get to the good stuff faster, right? Learn from my mistakes and my many, many years in the gutter. Because the thing that was hardest for me to learn was boundaries. Boundaries are really scary, and boundaries really are the key to living in accordance with your values, meeting your own emotional needs, and avoiding being manipulative. So I talk about boundaries a lot on this show, but I'm going to do a brief refresher after the break. But if you're going to switch off now because you're in your car, remember, other people don't have to like your boundaries, but they do have to respect them. For the rest, y'all, see you after the break. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. At Not Therapy Show is social media. Check out Monday Mantras and Wednesday's Wisdom every week, or most weeks anyway. Sometimes I forgot to give Megan, my social media person, the content. Oops. We'll be back after this. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking about the 4 building blocks of mental health: boundaries, values, needs, and avoiding manipulations. We need some kind of clever acronym for that so I can write a book and make those mediocre Canadian publishing bucks. But at first, I need to find a single word for avoiding manipulations, or maybe that's like the A. You know, we got kind of a NAM, but we don't quite have enough value. Some other time. Okay, boundaries. Boundaries, the last thing I promised to talk about. And part of this is because last week I touched on the idea of weaponized boundaries and how I don't believe they're actually a thing, but people talk about them while they're a thing. And it's just been eating at me ever since, right? I have been struggling with this concept. But I mean, like I said last week, I get what people are saying about weaponizing boundaries in appearance. But a weaponized boundary is not a boundary. If you're weaponizing something, it's just a manipulation with boundary written on it like a Starbucks cup. You know, boundary isn't even spelled right. It's like bundry, right? It's not a boundary at all. A boundary is about what you will accept, not what other people are expected to do. There is no way to weaponize that because both people matter in that equation. If someone wants you around and you go, stop doing that or I'm going to leave, they'll stop. If they don't care that you're around, they care about doing what they're doing or saying what they're saying more, they can keep right on doing it. There's no attempt there to control anyone but yourself. And there are some people that insist that in itself, asking someone to stop is a manipulation because more freedom, but it's not. And there are some people who think that needing to walk away because someone won't stop, well, that's them controlling you, but it's not. Everyone has a choice about who they're going to associate with. And the nice thing about understanding your needs and understanding your values is that, you know, you're prepared when you set a boundary that people can choose their behavior over your company, right? If they're prepared to accept the consequence of violating the boundary, that is their choice. That's why I say you can't actually weaponize the boundary. You can't weaponize a boundary, okay? You make your choices, the other person makes theirs. If you're setting boundaries, trying to make people do what you want, it's not a boundary. It's a manipulation, right? If I'm setting a boundary, I walk out of the huff, like I'm not speaking to you because you won't do this thing. No, that's not a boundary. By the way, you're speaking to them, telling them you're not speaking to them, right? Boundaries aren't retaliatory. They're not punishments. They're usually stated before things hit that point, right? Boundaries help because it's not about punishing the other person. It's not about getting back. It's not about vengeance. Boundaries are stating what you need and what you can't handle. And this communication gives the other people around you the chance to have more positive interactions with you. I love it when people say, please, say this instead of this. And I forget, but I really appreciate knowing, because I don't want to sit there going, like sucking up words that sting. So I don't want other people to have to do that themselves, right? And boundaries, you understand, there's gotta be an opportunity to adapt, and people are not gonna be perfect, right? You don't expect perfection, you expect people to try. And you do have to pick your battles with boundaries, because if there are too many things that someone can't do around you or someone can't say around you, they have the choice to not be around you, right? Again, it's only about what you and will and will not tolerate, not the other person. The nice thing about boundaries, because people, I can't see this, and I can't see that, and I can't see that. Somebody setting healthy boundaries should be able to give you an alternative phrase. When everyone has clearly communicated boundaries and those boundaries are being respected, no one feels steamrolled and no one feels silenced in a conversation or a decision. That's how it works. If you've got somebody who says, don't say that, say this instead, and then you do it, and that's bad too. Well, I was say, no. Those are reactions. Those aren't boundaries, right? The person doesn't seem to realize in those situations what their needs actually are. They need to step back and do some needs and boundaries work, right? And a lot of people need to do some needs, boundaries, and values work, because boundaries are not normalized in our society. But the entire point of setting boundaries is that it separates the bullies from people who are just awkward or differently socialized or possibly autistic. When you work with autistic people, boundaries become amazing, because you see, people with legit social challenges, they really appreciate you telling them something is bothering you so they can fix it instead of you just ghosting them. If someone decides to keep doing something you've said bothers you, that's on them, not you. Much like your needs, wants, and values, your boundaries make you you. And there's no good reason for people to bust your boundaries or for you to bust other people's boundaries. And I am busting up against the boundary of time. Questions, comments, any feedback, I like it. Liana at nottherapyshow.com. At nottherapyshow.com is the website. At nottherapyshow is the socials. You're crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. Take care.